Good morning. We have been blessed with such a beautiful day to come out and assemble and worship God. I pray that what I say will be pleasing and acceptable in His sight. Hopefully, our YouTube live stream is going correctly. They've been messing with some of the settings in there, and the last couple of weeks have not went live on the web page. So we'll begin talking today about prescriptions for spiritual health. We've talked about this kind of the last 2 weeks about self-examination and spiritual well-being and how important that is, because if we look at the world around us, it's doing its best to weaken us spiritually. And we need to keep these things in mind, because if we lose our eternal home because our spirit is not in a good relationship with God, then nothing else that we do on this earth is going to matter. If we're physically sick, if we have something wrong with us, and we talk to someone about that for any point in length of time, a possibility, I feel like I'm getting sick, I feel like I have the flu, I have this going on, whatever the ailment is, what's the first thing they're going to ask you? Are you taking anything? Have you got a pill to fix it? If we find ourselves sick or in pain or an ache that we don't normally have, what's the first thing we do? Well, let's see what I can do to get rid of this and take care of it. Now, typically, we'll start with some over-the-counter remedies during the cold and flu season and allergy season. That seems to be year-round here, but what do? We take the Allegra and the Claritin and those things to try to keep it in check. And then if it doesn't work and it gets too serious, well, then we've got to take a little trip to the doctor or the little clinic or someplace like that to get an antibiotic to help us start feeling better, because the over-the-counter stuff just isn't strong enough. And while physical health is important, as I started saying at the beginning, our soul's health is more important than all of our physical health combined. What's the prescription for keeping it healthy? Some people take medications physically, and we call those maintenance medications. They're for some ongoing problem, and my maintenance medication would be Allegra. If I stay on that year round, my head does a whole lot better in the height of allergy seasons. That's a maintenance medication. Now, if it's a prescription medicine, your pharmacy will keep those, keep the prescription current with your doctor, and then they'll call you every so often and say, you've got a new prescription ready. For a while, ours went to, you have to have a maintenance medication mailed to you. So that meant my neighbors got that medicine, or it just didn't show up, and there were some issues with that. But that's another story. But when we try to keep our physical health in the right frame, what do? We keep it monitored. We are actively looking at it. And the same can be said for our spiritual health. We need these maintenance prescriptions to keep our soul healthy. And if you remember, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we talked about our spiritual well-being and some things that we need to do to keep our spirit healthy, like being active and taking notice and learning and giving. And we need to make sure we're doing these things. But in reality, we have to go deeper than that. We have to be guarding our spirit with every resource that we have available. It's like someone that has some physical ailment, maybe high blood pressure or cholesterol or some forms of diabetes. Yes, diet and exercise can adjust a lot of those, but there are some that are just so severe that you have to take medication. It's important that we keep on them and keep them under control. Well, in 3 John chapter, I'll say this right some point in time this morning. In 3 John 2, John expresses his concern for Gaius's physical well-being. But notice here in 3 John 2, he talks about his spiritual health as well. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. He was concerned about his soul, his spirit, and was wanting him to prosper both physically and spiritually. Now, how about us? Are we concerned at all about our spiritual health? Or are we focused only on our physical? As Paul said, bodily exercise does profit a little bit, but your spiritual health, that's What's most important? How is it? Are we concerned about it? If we realize that there's something wrong, if we are weakening, if we, like we were talking in our Bible study with anger, are we struggling with that? If we see that we're having problems, what do we do to get us back on the right track? None of us are perfect. We all sin. We all have moments of weakness. We all have times that are more trying on us than others. But how do we bring ourselves back to the right relationship with God? If our attitude is one of being unconcerned about it, well, that's a very big red flag that should be sending up all kinds of warnings to us. But if we find ourselves, hey, I'm having trouble with this, I need to fix this, then we're at least on the right track. It's like someone with some glaring physical problem that they know they need to go to the doctor for, but they just keep putting it off and putting it off. And at some point, they put it off so long, something that was treatable has now become a fatality. It's too late to do anything about it. And so often with our physical health, being proactive, an approach to our wellness, looking at that. We've probably told Stephen this enough that he can put it to a song and sing it, but just the things that you can get away with in your 20s that don't affect you, that all of a sudden when you're in your 50s, that's a problem. Well, we didn't maintain it. We didn't watch out when we were younger, when we should have. And now it's become a problem. So what is needed to maintain a good level of spiritual health? I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV, but our doctors used to have a book called the Physician's Desk Reference. And they would look at it. Well, we have one of those for our spirit, and it's the Bible that we can turn to see what we need to be doing to make sure that we're maintaining good spiritual health. Well, the first thing that we do, the prescription for that, is we build a strong immune system. And we need that strong immune system to ward off the disease of sin. There's a lot of discussion going on and has been for years and years about vaccines. And we need some vaccines to keep us healthy because we don't build an immune system to, say, something like polio. You're just going to get it and you're going to get sick from it, and you can very well have life-altering and long-lasting consequences because of it. But without a healthy immune system, small threats can become deadly to us. Fellow that works with us, every time he goes into a school, he gets sick. He said, those kids are just so nasty. I can't be around. His immune system, and the teachers they've got an immune system that's probably stronger than 4 or 5 people's put together that aren't around those kids all the time. But you've got to build up that immune system to them, to the germs that are in there. Thankfully, I'm able to go in and I don't usually get sick from them. Maybe my immune system is a little bit stronger than his. But without a healthy immune system, what are they worried about when you have surgery? Well, we don't want the body, when it's in a weakened state, to have a germ get in it, because those small germs that may not even affect somebody that's healthy, someone that's had some kind of a surgical procedure, they're weakened. Or those that are getting cancer treatments or other things that can lower your immune system. Well, you got to be careful about getting around germs, don't you? But to that person that hasn't had any problems or isn't experiencing any issues, well, that doesn't matter. With the hundreds and hundreds of germs around us, on our skins even, and it doesn't bother us. But those who are in a weakened state, well, they get in trouble. Those of us who are healthy, if something happens to us, well, maybe we go get an antibiotic and we fix it and take care of it. But from a spiritual standpoint, how strong are we when it comes to temptations or false teachings or persecutions? Some of those can derail a person and make them give up on their faith completely. If we're strong, some of those just may not affect us at all. In fact, it may strengthen us. And there's some scriptures that we're going to look at that would show that some of these things can actually strengthen our faith. But some of these, if we're not strong, can cause us to lose our faith. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 14. Paul says here that we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men and the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. We're not immune to these temptations, but we're strong enough to handle them and endure them when they come. We're not like the child that is easily moved from one thing to the other. They're suggestible. They're easily influenced. If you don't believe me, go look in any grocery store in any city in this country and probably around the world. They spend a great deal of time in the marketing departments to fight over the shelving space of where they put certain cereals. My bran flakes are hidden in, I have the hardest time finding them. But boy, do the children's cereals with the colors that draw their attention, you know where they put those at eye level for a kid riding in a cart. Because that kid's going to see that and want it. And they know that they're going to aggravate their parents to the point of them buying it. And it's something that they didn't want or even think about 5 seconds before entering that aisle. Or those impulse buys, those toys and the junk that they put right by the cash register. Those are placed there for a reason, to tempt us in the spur. That's why they call them impulse buys. Or ask a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, that can change as fast as the wind blows. But Paul says here in Ephesians chapter 4 that there comes a time when we're to be strong enough spiritually that we are not bouncing around from one belief to the other. We are rooted and grounded. We are locked on to something and we firmly believe it. Now, if we have been doing what we've talked about in our past 2 lessons about examining ourselves and studying, we're going to be locked into the truth. And we're not going to be changing our belief every time the wind blows. Through all this, there's one thing that's for sure. And at some point in time, we're going to face these temptations. It's inevitable that we're going to face these problems. We cannot go through life without them. Temptations and spiritual hardships are just unavoidable as long as we are living in this world. And we have to be strong enough to endure them. We can't live in a bubble. We can't escape what is in this world. Avoiding all contact as much as it would like. Sometimes I say I would just like to move out into the wilderness and not be able to see my nearest neighbor. And not have to go out into public, not have to go to the store and be around with these people that don't know how to behave in public. But that's not how we can live. John chapter 17 and verse 15, Jesus is praying here. And he's talking to his Father in heaven about his disciples, and that would include us who are in this world. And he says in John chapter 17 and verse 15, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. In thinking about the germs that we were talking about, if we could see them, and I'm sure we've all seen the programs on Discovery Channel and programming like that, where they take a microscope and they show you the germs. If we could really see them with our bare eye, we wouldn't want to go out in public. But then if we saw the germs that were in our house, we probably wouldn't want to be there either, but at least they're our germs, not someone else's. But we cannot avoid the physical germs of this world. It's impossible because they're everywhere. And that's just like spiritually, we can't avoid the sinful germs that are in this world either because they are everywhere. And we are in this world. It is filled with sin. We just can't we just can't remove ourselves from it. We have to be able to withstand it. That's what Jesus said. We keep us from the evil one. No, we're not going to be in a place where we're not around sin at all, but it's not going to affect us. To completely escape, that would mean that we would have to leave this world altogether. That's what Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and beginning in verse 9. And it's important to note there that while Paul says we can't escape it from the physical world, we have to keep it from the church. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and beginning in verse 9, I wrote you in my epistle not to keep company with sexually immoral people. Yet I certainly did not mean with the sexually immoral people of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of this world. To get away from those people, we would have to leave the world. What's he talking about? Well, if we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, he is talking about those people that are in the church that are involved in those things. We must do our best to keep the church pure and clean from sin. We can't leave this world and escape sin, but we can't condone sin inside the church, inside of our members. This is where we are to go. This is who we are to be around for spiritual strength and a refuge from sin, not a place where we go to condone sin. This is where we come to get away from it, not to harbor it. And that's why it was so important there. They had one in their congregation that was involved in sin and blatant about it. He wasn't trying to hide it. It wasn't a sin that he committed, say, behind the wheel of a car when somebody cut him off, as we were talking about, and maybe he did or said something he shouldn't have. That's a one-time sin. This was something that was ongoing, that they all knew about, that they were allowing to continue. And he said, you have to remove that. And to keep that church pure means I keep myself pure. I cannot be involved in sin. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 18. Not that we're never going to sin, but we are not habitually or characteristically a sinner. There's a big difference between the two there. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 18, we know that whoever is born of God does not sin, but he who has been born of God keeps himself, and the wicked one does not touch him. We're not living in sin. We're not continually putting forth effort to be involved in it. We're trying our best to stay away from it. With the help of God, we can. And spiritually speaking, we have to build up our resistance to that. James chapter 4 and beginning in verse 7 and 8. It is impossible to stand against the temptation of the devil without us building up our resistance to him and without God's help. James chapter 4 and verse 7, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. How do we resist the devil? Well, we do that by bowing to God's will. We put his will over ours. We're doing what he wants us to do. We're following his example. We're following his commandments. And in doing that, we're building up our strength to resist the devil. Does that mean the devil is going to go running from us and never tempt us again? No, he's probably going to start working harder to tempt us. He's not going to move on completely. We're not going to be free from temptations, but we can overcome him. We can defeat him in the end. Because with a strong immune system, we're going to be able to withstand those trials that he's going to throw at us. Those trials of life that come our way. We read this last Sunday from 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12 and 13. He begins with taking heed. Be aware of how we're standing, because if we're not paying attention, we're going to fall. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. God will provide that way of escape if I'm willing to look for it. This temptation that I'm caught up in here is telling me it does not have to overtake me. But to make this happen, I have to watch how I walk. And I have to be careful. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 15 says we're to live circumspectly. To walk circumspectly. A definition of that is watchful and discreet, cautious, prudent, careful to consider all consequences and possibility of consequences. Now, that's a problem in our world today. We don't want to consider any consequences on what we're doing. We want to do what we want to do and then have no consequences. Ephesians 5 and verse 15 says, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is." I cannot read verse 16 without thinking of Hollis, because he quoted that so often in our Bible study. Use your time wisely. Rescue it from sinful living, from wasting it. And as a Christian, before we do anything, before we make any decision, before we get involved in anything, if we're walking circumspectly as a wise person, then we're going to consider all the consequences of something as far as we can see before we get involved in them. There was a campaign years ago, a few years ago at least, I'll say 20 years ago, but it may have been less or a little bit more than that. But it was WWJD. What would Jesus do? And that was sold. You could find it in souvenir shops and things. It was sold with those initials on it. And I saw a poster or something, and it had a whole bunch of letters on them. And you can figure out the lettering. But instead of what would Jesus do, it stood for Jesus would never get himself in that situation in the first place. It had all the letters of the start, the acronym for that. What would Jesus do? Well, he wouldn't have gotten himself in that situation in the first place. And sometimes that might be our way of escape out from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, that God's going to provide us, is you watch your step in the first place and you won't end up in this situation. And as we make decisions, as we go down our course in life, we can't see, we have, don't have the ability to see forever into the future. And there are things that can happen that go completely unplanned from what we think will happen. But some things we get involved in, we know the consequences before we ever start. Maybe that's it. Maybe we stay away from it. And they couldn't be any clearer if they had a blinking sign on them that this is not the way we should be going. Well, that's where we should have built up our strength, our spiritual strength, that immune system, so that we don't go down that path. Because even if we're continuously on guard, Satan is always going to be fighting against us. He's going to continue his attack on us, and we have to be able to withstand that. Ephesians chapter 6 and beginning in verse 10. When we're working to stand against the devil, he's only going to continue to tempt us harder. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 10, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." Now, we may look at the passages that we've looked at, and you'd say, well, you just read from James chapter 4, where he said to resist the devil and he's going to flee from you. And now you're saying that we're going to have to continuously be at war against Satan and the tools that he has, and we're going to have to continuously battle against him. Which one is it? Well, while we're on this earth, both are going to be true. We're going to be having to resist the devil and the temptation. But the more that we stand up to it, the stronger we get, the easier it is. Those things, as Solomon was talking about in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, those things that may seem so appealing to us when we're young, as we grow old, we realize that's not where it's at. That's not where we find true happiness. I have no pleasure in that. That's how we get the devil to leave us alone. We continuously say no to him. And yes, we are in a war, and we cannot let our guards down. We're in a battle, but we are, as a Christian, we should be prepared for that battle. God has given us all the gear that we need to be successful. If we were placed, I said last week about being a soldier and dropped into the battlefield, do I want to stand by myself there? No, I want a platoon of people that I can count on around me. And the same would hold true for my gear. I remember in the movie Black Hawk Down, if you ever watched that, probably one of my favorite war movies, but one of the guys, they had bulletproof plates, and he said, "This is going to be a quick mission. We don't need the one on our back. It's just weight. I don't plan to get shot running away. I'm not going to put that heavy plate in my vest." Well, in the movie, that guy ended up getting shot in the back, not because he was running away, but because he was surrounded by the enemy. And he didn't take all the gear that he had available to him. We won't be successful in this spiritual battle if we leave the spiritual armor that God has given to us. If we leave those weapons behind, how in the world do we expect to go out and stand against the devil? Well, we've underestimated him and we've overestimated ourselves. I don't need this. I'm so strong, I can do without it. That's going to weaken me spiritually. Also contributing to a strong immune system, and this is true physically as well as spiritually, but exercise helps that. We thrive only when we're active. We talked about that last week, about being involved. This is true spiritually as well as it is physically. There is never a point when we can sit back and do nothing and expect to keep growing, especially spiritually. If we're not working on our spiritual side, then we are being overtaken and we are weakening. Hebrews chapter 6 warns us about being spiritually sluggish. It's very dangerous when we get out there and we start drifting. It's dangerous because it's easy to do. There's no effort required to drift. Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 11. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. When we start to do something new, when we have something, get a new device or a new vehicle or a new hobby or anything like that, we are very diligent with it. We don't want to lose any moment in learning about it. We put all of our attention and effort into it. That's diligence. But as time passes, as the new wears off, as a newer model comes out, probably faster than we've unwrapped the old model, we start to lose interest in whatever that is. The new car's smell starts to go away. We don't wash it and clean it and keep after it the way that we once did when it was brand new. Long before the payments stop. We're no longer interested in it. We've lost our diligence. And here, the same diligence the writer's talking about here is having that active faith and labor the way that you did at the very beginning when you were on fire. That they were very diligent, and he's reminding them that he desires them to continue to do so. Put effort in it. And in verse 12, that shows how much value they were placing in it, or what he was warning them about becoming sluggish. Don't become sluggish, but look at the examples that you have in front of you. The value of being around those of like precious faith, as we say. Imitate those who have gone on to their reward. We have a book full of them. Hebrews chapter 11 is one example of that. But we also have examples of fellow Christians who have gone on and remained faithful to their reward, to their inheritance, the promise of the inheritance that they were faithful for. We have a congregation full of those that we should believe are now in their heavenly home. Look to them. That's where we go so that we don't drift. Because as we looked at last week or 2 weeks ago, we have been created to do something. We have been created to walk in good works. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10. And we've looked at the next two verses last week. So this will be the point that we end on this morning and pick up with the rest of this thought this evening, but this involves activity. I have to do something. I can't sit on the sideline or on my couch and not do anything and expect that my health spiritually is going to be okay. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10, for we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And we're not active as Christians by sitting on the sidelines, by sitting back and not doing anything. We can't even be a pew warmer. A bench warmer, somebody in sports that never gets out on the field to play, that's the Christian. There's no opportunity for a pew warmer. We might as well not even be warming that pew because we're not getting anything out of it if we're not being involved. There's work that is to be done. And we become unfaithful if we don't maintain these works until the very end. Titus chapter 3 and verse 8 and in verse 14. And we're told what happens to us if we don't. Verse 8 says, this is a faithful saying, and these things I want you to affirm constantly, that those who believe in God should be careful to maintain good works. These things are good and profitable to men. And verse 14 is the warning. And let our people also learn to maintain good works, to meet urgent needs, that they may not be unfruitful. And I stop producing fruit, and that's what we're going to look at this evening, then I'm going to be removed. And me producing fruit for the Lord means that I'm doing something, that I'm serving him. If I haven't obeyed him, or if I'm living in a way where my spirit is weak and it needs strengthening, well, we're told how we can handle that. If I find myself, as Peter says, take and cast all your cares on the Lord, for he cares for you. I also have a room full of people around me that care for me, or we should. We should care for one another. We should want one another to succeed, and we should be able to help and strengthen one another so that we will be successful. If we're not, then we're not doing our jobs as Christians. And this is something that just is weighing so heavy on my mind right now, maybe just me personally. But I look around at the shape of the world that we're in, and it worries me. The condition of it, the care for our soul, the care for life and other humans, it's just not there, is it? At least not by the majority, or at least not by what we're seeing, especially on the news. Maybe that should be part of the problem. We just turn that off and start looking around, because there are examples of others caring, but we see a lot of people that just don't care for anybody but themselves. And that weakens us. That makes us not care. And that's something that we should be concerned about. And if we need that strength and if we need that help, we have no better time than right now to ask for that. If you're subject to the Lord's invitation in any way, we invite you to come as we stand and sing.